What if I told you that one king, a teenager forced onto the throne, would ignite a century-long war, reinvent the English crown, and turn a fragile kingdom into a European superpower? This is the rise of Edward III of England, a king born into chaos, who answered with conquest. Edward was born in 1312, in a kingdom trembling under the rule of his father, Edward the Setergan. A king despised by nobles, undermined by favorites, and increasingly abandoned by his own wife, Queen Isabella of France. From the moment Edward III entered the world, he was surrounded by whispers. The kingdom is dying. The crown is collapsing. And this child may be England's last hope. By age 14, he watched his mother turn against his father, forming an alliance with the exiled noble Roger Mortimer. Together, they invaded England. Town by town, castle by castle, the kingdom fell. Edward's estate was overthrown, imprisoned. And the boy, barely old enough to wield a sword, was crowned King Edward III. But here's the twist. He wasn't a king at all. He was a prisoner wearing a crown. Isabella and Mortimer ruled in his name, using the young king as a puppet while they seized lands, titles, and power. England's nobles murmured in anger. The court shifted with fear. And Edward? He watched, he learned, and he waited. For 3 years, the kingdom suffered humiliation. Scotland pushed deep into English lands. France refused to respect Edward as a ruler. Taxes were rising, morale collapsing. But beneath the surface, the young king was awakening. Studying politics, learning strategy, memorizing every mistake his father had made. Then came the night that changed England forever. 1328. Deep inside Nottingham Castle, Edward III gathered a small group of loyal knights. No armies, no royal decree. Just steel, shadows, and a plan only a desperate man would dare attempt. Through a hidden tunnel beneath the castle, Edward and his men crawled upward into Mortimer's private chambers. The regent, the man who ruled England, woke to the cold edge of the king's sword. Edward spoke only 4 words. "You have betrayed England." Mortimer was dragged away, executed, and the queen was confined. At just 17, Edward III finally seized the power that had always been his. With the shackles gone, he transformed from a quiet boy king into one of the most ambitious rulers Europe had ever seen. He rebuilt the royal court, strengthened the crown, restored authority. He raised England's military from the ashes, rebuilding cavalry, training archers, restoring discipline. Trade expanded, nobles returned to his side. The kingdom regained its heartbeat. But Edward wanted more than stability. He wanted glory, and destiny soon gave him a reason. His mother was French, and under French law, that meant Edward had a claim, a dangerous claim, to the throne of France itself. France rejected him, mocked him, dismissed him as a boy pretending to be king. Edward's answer would reshape the medieval world. The drums of war began to echo, a war that would last 100 years, a war that would forge legends. A war that would make Edward III the warrior king England still remembers. The king who conquered at sea. The king who introduced the longbow as a weapon of terror. The king who raised sons known as the Princes of Fire, including one who would become a myth, the Black Prince. Imagine declaring war on the most powerful kingdom in Europe, with an army outnumbered, outspent, and surrounded by enemies. Yet somehow you believe you can win. This was the mindset of Edward III as he prepared to challenge France and ignite the 100 Years' War. It began with a single act of defiance. France had seized English territories. French ships attacked English merchants. For Edward, the humiliation was personal. The French king, Philip VI, dismissed him as a boy pretending to rule. Edward had sent envoys, letters, offers of peace, but every word was ignored. Until Edward did something unthinkable. He claimed the French throne, not as a threat, not as a gesture, but as a declaration of destiny, rooted in his own French blood. Across Europe, kings gasped. This wasn't politics. It was a declaration of total war. Edward began to prepare England like a kingdom possessed. He rebuilt the navy, he reformed the army, And most importantly, he doubled down on a weapon France underestimated, the English longbow, a storm of arrows to shatter the pride of French knights. But before the first land battle, the sea would test his resolve. The sea battle that changed everything. Sluys, 1340. France planned to invade, to crush England by sea. Edward responded with boldness bordering on madness. He personally led the English navy across the Channel, the first English king to command a fleet at sea. As dawn broke, the French ships loomed. Edward was outnumbered, but not outsmarted. He ordered his ships lashed together into a floating fortress. Then the longbows sang. By nightfall, the sea was red with defeat. Edward had destroyed French naval power in a single day. England cheered, Europe watched, and France was terrified. But the war was only beginning. The road to Crécy. In 1346, Edward launched a full-scale invasion of France. His strategy was revolutionary: mobility, precision, and discipline. As he advanced, Philip VI gathered an enormous army to crush the invaders. Edward III realized what was coming, a confrontation that could end his kingdom or immortalize his name. He chose the battlefield. At a quiet village called Crécy, he positioned his troops on high ground. And waiting beside him, armored in black steel, was his 16-year-old son, Prince Edward. This battle was not just for a crown. It was his son's trial by fire. The English army was tired, outnumbered, far from home. Yet Edward III stood with a calm that unnerved his own captains, because he knew if France attacked here, they would break. The night before Crécy. On that night, Edward walked the camp alone, studying every line by torchlight. He didn't need speeches. His soldiers believed in him. As he looked upon his son, he was not just a king planning a battle, but a father facing his heir's destiny. As dawn approached, French banners appeared on the horizon. The Battle of Crécy was about to begin. Edward stood at the front lines. His son, the young prince, prepared to fight his first great battle. And France was marching straight into the storm. Imagine standing on a hill with an army half the size of your enemy. Behind you, miles of hostile territory. Ahead, a tidal wave of French knights charging with the fury of a continent. This was Crécy. And what happened here would rewrite the laws of medieval warfare. The battle begins. Crécy, 1346. The August sun burned over the battlefield as Edward III's forces braced themselves. On the opposite side, France arrived in chaos. Tens of thousands of cavalry, mercenaries, crossbowmen, and nobles, all eager to crush the English invaders. But eagerness is not strategy. Speed is not discipline. And pride is not a plan. Edward III had the advantage of terrain. France had numbers, but numbers mean nothing when packed into panic. Philip VI, desperate to attack before the English could fortify further, ordered an immediate assault. The French crossbowmen were pushed to the front and told to advance, even though they were exhausted after marching for hours under scorching heat. Edward watched silently. He knew what was coming. The crossbowmen lifted their weapons, but they were no match for the weapon that would become a symbol of English dominance, the longbow. The sky turns to iron. With a signal from Edward, the hillside erupted. Thousands of longbowmen unleashed a storm of arrows so dense it appeared as a black shadow in the sky. The crossbowmen broke almost instantly. Their strings were wet from a sudden rain earlier that day, weakening their power, while longbows remained deadly. Bodies fell in waves. Confusion rippled through the French lines. And then, the real disaster began. As the crossbowmen retreated in terror, the French knights behind them grew furious at the chaos. In arrogance and rage, the knights charged through their own fleeing men, trampling allies under hooves, crushing bodies, turning retreat into massacre. Edward III's trap was working. The first charge. The French cavalry roared up the hill, armored like moving fortresses. They expected the English to break. They expected fear. They expected tradition, the belief that knights were invincible. But Edward wasn't fighting the old way. He wasn't fighting their battle. He was rewriting the rules. The knights charged directly into pits and stakes hidden in the ground. Horses stumbled, collapsed, and rolled onto their riders. Archers stepped forward, unleashing deadly volleys at point-blank range. Armor cracked, shields split. The French charge shattered, but France wasn't finished. They sent another wave, then another, then another. It became a mountain of bodies at the foot of the English lines. Yet Edward's men held the hill, like a wall of steel. The Black Prince's trial by fire. At the center of the battlefield fought a young warrior, just 16 years old, clad in dark armor. Prince Edward, the Black Prince. This was his first great test. He fought fiercely, leading men decades older, proving himself with every blow. At one moment, his forces were pushed back by a surge of French knights. A messenger ran to the king. "Sire, your son is in danger. Shall we send reinforcements?" Edward III famously answered, "Is he dead?" "No, my lord." "Then he does not need my help. Let the boy win his spurs." It was a moment that defined both father and son. A king forging a legend. The Black Prince rallied his forces and pushed back with ferocious determination. By the end of the battle, he emerged as a symbol of English courage, his armor dented, his sword dripping, his name forever etched into history. The fall of France at Crécy. As evening approached, France attempted one final desperate assault. It collapsed almost instantly. The withering accuracy of English archers, the discipline of infantry, the iron will of the king. Crécy became a graveyard. France lost thousands. Nobles, knights, commanders, even the blind king of Bohemia, who insisted on charging into battle tied to two knights so he could strike one blow for honor. Edward III's victory was absolute. Crécy wasn't just a win, it was a revolution in warfare. The age of the unstoppable knight was ending. The age of ranged power, strategy, and discipline had begun, and England was now feared across Europe. But Edward's ambition didn't stop here. He marched toward one of the greatest prizes of the war, a fortress so strong it was said no English king could take it, a city whose capture would shake France to its core, Calais. What happens after you crush the mightiest army in Europe? If you are Edward III, you take aim at the greatest fortress on the French coast, a city so vital that whoever holds it controls the gateway between England and the continent. This is the siege that proved Edward wasn't just a warrior. He was a strategist, a conqueror, a king of endurance. Welcome to Calais. The road to Calais, 1346. After the earth-shaking victory at Crécy, Edward III had momentum. His army was bloodied but unstoppable, and French morale was shattered. But Edward understood one brutal truth: battles win glory. Sieges win kingdoms. And so he marched north toward Calais, a fortress city perched on the edge of the channel, heavily defended, well-supplied, and nearly impossible to starve. Calais was France's doorway. Its harbor connected French trade to the North Sea. Its walls were fresh, thick, and unbroken. Its garrison was loyal and determined. But Edward was equally determined. He wanted this city not for pride, but for a permanent foothold to strike deeper into France. And he was prepared to wait as long as it took. The siege begins. Edward encircled the city with ruthless precision. He built fortified camps, watchtowers, trenches, and wooden palisades, not only to keep the French inside, but to keep reinforcements out. Calais was cut off by land. Its supplies dwindled. But there was one weakness: the sea. French ships could still reach the port. Food, weapons, and hope flowed into the city through the waves. So Edward built an answer: a floating blockade. A chain of English ships anchored carefully across the harbor entrance, preventing any vessel from slipping through. It was the first large-scale naval blockade in English history. Now Calais was truly trapped. The test of endurance. Weeks turned into months. Months into a year into more. Edward III remained in the siege camps through storms, mud, hunger, and disease. He refused to leave. He refused to negotiate. He refused to allow the French king to break the encirclement. His discipline inspired the entire army. Inside Calais, suffering reached unthinkable levels. Food vanished, horses were eaten, dogs got rats, even boiled leather. Yet the garrison would not surrender. Stories spread of mothers crying as they handed starving children to English soldiers outside the walls, choosing the enemy over watching them die within. Edward allowed the innocent to pass, but the soldiers stayed trapped. He was at war with the city, not the helpless. The French last hope. Philip VI finally gathered a relief army, the last chance to save Calais. He marched across France, desperate to break the siege. But when he reached the English walls, he hesitated. Edward III had fortified his lines with terrifying strength. Attacking meant certain disaster. For days, the two kings faced each other across the fields, neither willing to risk destruction. Then Philip did the unthinkable. He withdrew. He abandoned Calais. The fortress, starving and hopeless, had only one choice left: the 6 burghers of Calais. After 11 brutal months, Calais surrendered. But Edward III wanted a symbol, a gesture to show that this victory was not temporary. He demanded that 6 of the city's leading citizens come forward, barefoot, ropes around their necks, keys to the city in their hands, prepared to die. It was a moment designed to break the spirit of France. The 6 burghers stepped out, thin, hollow-eyed, ready for execution. The English soldiers watched in silence. The siege had been long, cruel, heavy with death. But something unexpected happened. Queen Philippa, Edward's wife, pregnant at the time, begged the king to spare them. She pleaded not as a queen, but as a mother. Edward, the warrior king, the conqueror, paused, and he granted their lives. This moment would be immortalized in art, literature, and legend. A rare spark of mercy in an age of iron. England claims Calais with the gates unlocked. Edward III marched into the city that had resisted him for nearly a year. He expelled the remaining French inhabitants and repopulated Calais with English families. It became a royal stronghold, a jewel of English power on French soil. Calais would remain under English control for more than 2 centuries. More importantly, the fall of Calais transformed Edward III from a victorious general into a master of long-term strategy. But triumph carries a price. As Edward celebrated victory in France, a storm darker than war began creeping toward Europe. A silent killer that would strike kings and peasants alike. A plague that would reshape the world. The Black Death was coming. What happens when a king at the height of his power meets a terror he cannot fight with armies, arrows, or walls? As Edward III tightened his grip on France, an invisible enemy crossed the sea. Unstoppable, unseen, and merciless. A force that would kill 1/3 of Europe. The Black Death. The plague arrives. 1348. Edward III had conquered Calais. His armies were feared. His son, the Black Prince, was becoming a legend. England seemed untouchable. Then the ships came. Small merchant vessels drifting silently into English harbors. Crews dead or dying, bodies covered in boils, fever burning through flesh, coughs throwing blood into the air. Within days, towns fell like dominoes. The Black Death had arrived. For the first time in his reign, Edward III faced an enemy he could not outthink, outfight, or outmaneuver. This was not war. This was annihilation. A king in the shadow of death. Edward ordered quarantines. He closed ports. He issued laws to stop travel. But it didn't matter. The plague was everywhere. London turned into a city of fear. Bells rang endlessly for the dead. Graves overflowed. Bodies piled in the streets. Whole villages vanished from the map. No crown could protect a king from a pandemic that killed rich and poor with equal hunger. And soon, the plague struck the royal court. Edward's beloved daughter, Princess Joan, only 15 years old, traveled to Spain to marry a prince. She never arrived. She died on the journey, swallowed by the plague before she could claim her future. When news reached Edward, the mighty king who had defeated France at sea, land, and wall, fell into a grief deeper than any battlefield loss. This war was different. There was no strategy. No victory, only survival. The kingdom collapses. Fields lay empty. Markets silent. Castles undermanned. The English war machine sputtered to a halt. Everywhere the question echoed, why is God punishing us? Peasants fled their homes. Priests died before finishing last rites. Labor shortages became so extreme that Edward had to issue the Statute of Laborers, freezing wages to stop society from crumbling. But even this law showed a kingdom changing forever. The working class gained power through scarcity. Lords lost control of their lands. Entire social structures fractured. The plague didn't just kill people. It killed the medieval world. Edward's response: order in chaos. Amid the catastrophe, Edward III did something remarkable. He held the kingdom together. He kept justice functioning, maintained the army, and preserved administrative order even as the population was dying around him. And when the worst years passed, he began rebuilding. Reopening courts, restoring trade, rearming the military, reviving the royal treasury. Most kings would have been broken by the plague. Edward endured, and slowly, painfully, England began to breathe again. But across the Channel, France, weakened, divided, and unable to recover, was nearing collapse. And Edward III saw an opportunity. The 100 Years' War was far from over. The Black Prince rises. As England emerged from the shadow of death, a new figure stepped forward to reclaim the glory of war. Edward, the Black Prince. The plague had turned the prince from a youthful hero into a hardened commander. He reorganized armies, trained archers, improved logistics, crafted strategies more ruthless and precise than any general of his age. And he had one target: France. Edward III, now older but still fiercely ambitious, trusted his son with unprecedented authority. Together, father and son crafted a campaign that would break the French crown once and for all. The storm returns. War reignites. In 1355, English armies swept across France with terrifying precision. They burned supply lines, cut trade routes, destroyed towns loyal to the French king. These were not random attacks. They were chevauchés, scorched earth strikes designed to collapse the enemy economy and force France onto its knees. France panicked, and finally, in 1356, the French King John II gathered a massive army to stop the English raids. What followed would become one of the most astonishing battles in medieval history. A confrontation that made the Black Prince into a myth and shattered French royal pride. The place was called Poitiers. The Black Prince was outnumbered, surrounded, nearly trapped. But he was his father's son, a strategist, a warrior, a commander forged in the fires of Crécy. And at Poitiers, he would do the impossible: defeat the French king and capture him alive. A moment that would shake Europe to its core. Imagine facing an army twice your size, with no escape, no reinforcements, and no retreat. Your only weapon is discipline. Your only hope is strategy. Your enemy, the King of France himself. This is the story of Poitiers, the battle where Edward III's son, the Black Prince, rewrote the fate of nations. The French Trap, 1356. The English had been raiding the French countryside for months, burning supply lines, cutting royal income, breaking morale. This scorched earth campaign was working too well. France had had enough. King John II assembled a massive army determined to crush the English force once and for all. The Black Prince realized too late that the French were closing in. He tried to retreat, he tried to maneuver, but the French blockade tightened like a noose. His scouts returned with the report every commander fears: there is no exit. The prince and his men were trapped near the plains of Poitiers, but defeat wasn't in his blood. The Black Prince looked over the fields and began shaping the battlefield into a weapon. The prince's plan. Instead of panicking, he acted with calm, almost unnerving clarity. He placed his archers in hidden positions among hedges and ditches. He moved infantry into narrow lanes where French cavalry couldn't spread. He dug pits and traps along the approaches. He positioned himself on a small rise. a perfect defensive anchor. If the French attacked head-on, they would walk into a maze of death. The English were outnumbered, but their commander had turned the landscape into an invisible fortress. And the French, their king believed his numbers alone would win the day. He would learn how wrong he was. The negotiation that failed. Before the battle, the papal legate rushed between the two camps begging for peace. The Black Prince offered generous terms. He did not want annihilation, he only wanted safe passage home. But King John wanted glory, revenge, a decisive, crushing victory. He rejected every offer. He would learn that pride is the most expensive currency in war. The battle ignites at dawn, September 19th, 1356. The French began their advance. It was chaos disguised as confidence. Crossbowmen moved forward, but English archers shattered them with a storm of arrows. French cavalry surged, but crashed into traps, pits, and barricades. Knights pressed forward, only to be funneled into narrow lanes where English infantry cut them down. For hours, the French army bled against the silent precision of the English defenses. And then, King John made his fatal mistake. He ordered all remaining cavalry to dismount and attack on foot, turning mobility into exhaustion, strength into weakness, and numbers into targets. The entire French army was now a crawling, compressed mass, perfect for longbow devastation. The Black Prince saw the moment. He unleashed his archers. The field turned into a rainstorm of iron. The French collapse. As the French front ranks fell, panic surged backward. Confusion turned into terror. The lines broke. Some French units fled, others surrendered. Some fought desperately but were overwhelmed. And then came the moment that would echo across Europe. King John II, armored, exhausted, covered in dust, found himself surrounded. His guards fought but fell one by one. English soldiers surged in, realizing they had cornered a king. John raised his sword. "I yield!" A French king captured alive. It was unthinkable, unprecedented. A humiliation beyond imagination. The Black Prince treated John with respect, offering him protection and honor. But the message to Europe was clear. England had broken the French crown. The aftermath, a king in chains. The news spread like wildfire. Markets stopped. Courts fell silent. Bells rang across England. Edward III rejoiced. Not with reckless celebration, but with deep strategic satisfaction. France was leaderless, humiliated, and teetering on collapse. King John was transported to England, treated with royal dignity, but always under guard. He became a living symbol of English power. In 1360, Edward forced France into signing the Treaty of Bretigny, one of the most humiliating treaties in medieval history. England gained massive territories in Aquitaine. The French paid an enormous ransom for their king. Edward's claim to the throne of France remained alive. The English war machine was now richer and stronger than ever. It was the high point of Edward III's reign. But no triumph lasts forever. Behind the glory, something darker was beginning to unfold. Not on the battlefield, but within the royal family. The Black Prince, the mighty hero of Poitiers, began showing signs of a mysterious illness. His strength faded, his victories slowed, and the dynasty Edward built on the battlefield began to tremble. Worse still, a new king was rising in France, a shrewder one, a patient one, a king destined to undo Edward's triumphs. His name was Charles V, and he was about to change the course of the 100 Years' War. Edward III was now a king feared across Europe, but fear breeds enemies. And the moment England tasted victory, the world united to humble him. But Edward was not a man who backed down. He was a king who fought harder when cornered. What happens when a king refuses to accept defeat? When his ambition grows far beyond the limits of crowns, borders, and diplomacy? Edward III was about to find out. By the late 1360s, the balance of power began to shift. The unstoppable English war machine, one that dominated Crécy, crushed Poitiers, and carved through France, suddenly began to stumble. The first blow came from within his own family. The Black Prince falls. His son, Edward the Black Prince, England's undefeated hero, the warrior who burned French cities and took kings prisoner, was dying. Years of brutal campaigning, disease, and exhaustion had drained the life out of him. The man who once rode into battle like a storm now struggled to stand without assistance. For Edward III, this was not only the loss of an heir, it was the collapse of everything he had built. The king who once stood invincible now watched his greatest weapon fade away. And France, they saw their moment. France strikes back under King Charles V. France changed the game. No more charging at English longbows. No more flashy battles. No more walking into traps. Instead, France avoided open combat, retook towns quietly, starved English garrisons, cut supply lines, and waited for English forces to overextend. It worked. English armies, once dominant, suddenly found themselves isolated and surrounded. One fortress after another fell. The tide of the 100 Years' War, the very war Edward began, turned violently against him. All the territories he conquered with blood and brilliance began slipping away. The king grows old. As his world shrinks, Edward III, once the fierce warrior king who rode at the front lines, was now a man in his 50s, then 60s. Age crept in like an enemy he couldn't defeat. The once razor-sharp mind dulled. The once unmatched physical power faded. The once legendary king rarely left his chambers. As his sons and nobles bickered for power, the king who built an empire watched it unravel from his own throne. And then came the heaviest blow of all, the death of the Black Prince, 1376. The Black Prince, just 45 years old, died after years of illness. England mourned the warrior who had led them to glory. Edward III mourned the son who carried his spirit. The king broke. Chroniclers wrote that Edward aged 20 years and 1. He barely spoke. His health plummeted. The court held its breath. England was losing the man who shaped its destiny. But history was not finished with him. Before the king's final chapter, one last twist emerged. His grandson, young Richard, just a boy, was named heir to the throne. Edward III now faced a truth he never imagined. The future of England rested not in the hands of a warrior, but in the hands of a child. The king who forged a dynasty of knights and conquerors now passed the torch to a boy who had never seen war. And as the world sensed England's weakness, the French prepared to strike once more. The final threat. The channel filled with hostile ships. French raiders burned English coastal towns. The war Edward started decades earlier now threatened to reach England's own doorstep. And the king, old, weak, and slipping away, could no longer stop it. But Edward III's story was not over yet, because even in his fading days, even when his body betrayed him, his legacy was about to carve itself into the core of English history. A final act remained, a final declaration, a final legacy that would echo through centuries. Edward III's life was a storm of battles, rebellions, and glory. But every storm eventually collapses into silence. And for the king who reshaped England's destiny, that silence came slowly, painfully, and full of shadows. What happens when the greatest warrior king of his age becomes a prisoner of time itself? This is Edward III in his final chapter, a king fading, but a legacy rising. The Empire he built begins to fracture France, emboldened, reorganized, and burning with revenge, launched a wave of victories. Cities Edward once conquered slipped away like sand through his fingers. England's coffers drained, its armies shrank, its pride dimmed. For the first time in decades, the kingdom Edward ruled with an iron fist felt vulnerable. And Edward? He could only watch, no longer riding at the head of armies. No longer the sharp strategist of Crécy or Poitiers. Age had chained him, slowly, relentlessly, until the warrior inside him became a memory. A kingdom ruled by others. As Edward's strength faded, powerful nobles stepped into the vacuum. His mistress, Alice Perrers, gained influence over court politics. Corrupt advisors fattened their pockets while peasants starved. Parliament grew restless, and whispers began to spread. The king no longer rules England. Factions formed. Plots thickened. Ambition ran wild. Once, Edward commanded Europe's respect. Now he struggled to command his own household. The loss that broke him forever. Nothing shattered the king more than losing his son, Edward, the Black Prince, the warrior heir he had groomed for war, the hero who captured the King of France, the prince who carried all the fire his father once possessed. Gone. The king's heart collapsed with him. Chroniclers wrote that after the Black Prince's death, Edward III seemed to wither as a leaf in winter. He stopped attending councils. He rarely appeared in public. He moved slowly, spoke less, slept more, a legend dimming. A child, heir, and a king in decline. With the Black Prince gone, the crown passed to his young son, Richard, a boy barely old enough to understand the weight of kingship. Edward knew the dangers. England was sliding into instability. France was rising again, and the future king was a child. The Lion of England could no longer protect his cubs. It haunted him. The final humiliation, 1377. French fleets attacked the English coast again, raiding towns and burning villages. For the first time since becoming king, Edward III's enemies threatened England's home soil. And the old king, who once rode fearlessly into battle, was too sick to rise from his bed. In his final months, he rarely left his chamber. He suffered from crippling illness. He drifted in and out of consciousness. He murmured names of fallen sons, lost battles, and forgotten dreams. The man who once dominated Europe now struggled simply to stay alive. The last breath of a legend, June 21st, 1377. Edward III lay dying at Sheen Palace. Most of his attendants, sensing his final moments, abandoned him. A heartbreaking betrayal for a king who had once inspired armies. Only a priest and a few loyal servants remain. It is said that with his last breath, Edward reached out, as if grasping for a sword that wasn't there. A final instinct of the warrior king he once was. And then, silence. The reign of 50 years. The architect of England's medieval identity, the man who ignited the 100 Years' War, was gone. But a king never dies if his story survives. Edward III left behind a stronger English parliament, a redefined monarchy, a warrior tradition, a dynasty that would shape centuries, a war that would echo until the era of Joan of Arc. His victories turned England into a European power. His ambition reshaped kingdoms. His sons and grandsons carried his legacy into chaos, conflict, triumph, and tragedy. He was flawed. He was relentless. He was brilliant. He was dangerous. He was Edward III, a lion whose roar still echoes through history. Edward III is gone, but his shadow, it still stretches across centuries, because some rulers fade with time, but others carve their names into the bones of history. Edward III was the latter. This is the final chapter, not of his life, but of the world he created. What if one king's ambition rewrote the destiny of an entire continent? Edward III did exactly that. The war he started never ended with him. When Edward claimed the throne of France in 1337, he didn't just ignite a conflict. He unleashed a generational war, a war that would outlive him, outlive his sons, outlive his grandsons. The 100 Years' War, a conflict that shaped national identities and kingly power, began with his declaration. And although he died before seeing its end, his fingerprints remained on every battle, every treaty, every shift of power until the war finally closed more than a century later. France's rise, England's transformation. The birth of national consciousness. All traced back to a single decision by Edward III. The armies he created set the standard for Europe. Longbows at Crécy. Trapping a king at Poitiers. New tactics blending mobility, discipline, and ranged power. Edward's reforms turned common Englishmen into one of the deadliest fighting forces of the medieval world. And that changed everything. Before Edward, knights ruled the battlefield. After Edward, armies became machines of organized strategy, not brute aristocratic power, the way Europe fights today. professional armies, trained units, strategic warfare, has its roots in reforms born in his reign. The Black Prince and the ghost of a dynasty. Edward's greatest creation wasn't a battlefield victory. It was the warrior dynasty he forged. The Black Prince, a hero whose name struck fear across France, was supposed to continue that legacy. His death shattered everything. England lost its greatest commander. Edward lost the future he dreamed of. A child, Richard II, took the throne after Edward III's death, setting the stage for one of the most chaotic chapters in English history. But the world never forgot the prince who fought like fire. Even in death, he remains a symbol of medieval chivalry, courage, and glory. A king who transformed England itself. Edward III strengthened something more powerful than any army: Parliament. He expanded its role, strengthened its influence, and made it essential to ruling the kingdom. His reign planted seeds for constitutional monarchy, a system that would define England long after the Plantagenets vanished. He also transformed culture. The Order of the Garter, a revival of English language literature, a surge of national identity, the rise of knightly traditions. Under Edward, the idea of being English solidified. He didn't just fight wars, he shaped culture. The dark side of his legacy. But legacies aren't made of glory alone. Under his watch, the Black Death devastated England. Taxes rose sharply. His later years were marred by corruption at court. His children's rivalries sowed the seeds of future conflict. His dynasty, the mighty Plantagenets, would eventually tear itself apart, leading to the Wars of the Roses. Edward's ambition built an empire, but it also built fractures that echoed long after his death. He was a king of triumphs, but also of consequences. How history remembers him. To his supporters, he was the architect of English greatness. To his enemies, he was the spark of endless war. To historians, he was one of the most influential medieval rulers. Bold, strategic, unyielding. A king who transformed a struggling kingdom into a European power. A commander who shattered armies. A visionary who reshaped government. A flawed man who loved war too much, but loved England more. The final word: so how do we define Edward III? A warrior? A statesman? A conqueror? A dreamer who reached too far? The truth is simple. He was all of them. He was the king who dared to challenge an empire. The king who forged legends on the battlefield. The king whose decisions shaped the modern identities of England and France. The king whose legacy still lives in every page of medieval history. Edward III did not just rule England. He rewrote its destiny. And that is why, centuries later, the roar of the lion is still heard.